Okay, we're jumping into the Money Minute Roundup for the month of June. I've got 6 articles coming your way, and we're going to start with common myth conceptions. And yes, I am pronouncing that correctly, myth conceptions. So all of us have heard so-called facts or factoids growing up, and it turns out a lot of them are not true. Growing up in the 90s, before everybody had instantaneous access to the internet, like, yeah, we had in-home internet in the late 90s, but not not in your phone, not something where you're like, is that true? And you can immediately Google it. There were so many things that you'd hear from one person and you just took it as fact, like, yes, that's true. And turns out a lot of them are not. So for instance, goldfish do not have a memory of 3 seconds. This was a new one for me. Your tongue doesn't have different parts for different tastes, which I feel like I remember seeing that in a science textbook growing up. The Vikings didn't wear horns. I did know that one, being a little bit of a history nerd myself. But there's a lot of interesting ones in here. Like, for instance, the Great Wall of China cannot be seen from space. Losing heat through your head, I'd always heard that growing up. Apparently that's true in infants, but not in adults. The only time you're going to be losing heat through your head primarily is if you're bundled up except for your head. So anyway, just a interesting collection of things from food, history, sports, science, common myth conceptions. If you want to check out that article, there's a link to it in the Money Minute email that I send out every month. CNBC had an article talking about how the United States added over 1,000 new millionaires a day in 2024. So lots of people becoming richer in America. America already leads the world in number of millionaires, and we continue to add to that number last year. Almost 24 million millionaires in the United States. And there is a conception, I think, in a lot of our minds about a millionaire as somebody who has a very upscale and lavish lifestyle. But of course, that's just not true in reality. In fact, many people who are millionaires, you wouldn't be able to distinguish them from anybody else that you would meet or see throughout the day because they live a very simple life. Remember that millionaire status is a net worth thing. It's not about income necessarily. It's about what you own. So for most Americans, the biggest asset that they own is their home. So what happens is over time as people work and they save into their retirement accounts, their bank account, but primarily through their home as their home goes up in value and they're paying it off, that becomes a very large part of their net worth. You could also include in that a business that somebody owns or other properties. And what you do is you add all of the value of those things together, all the assets they own, and then you subtract any loans that are owed, and that gives you your net worth. And so $1 million, while that is a lot of money, there's a lot of people that when you add up what they own and then subtract what they owe, that's over $1 million, and that continues to grow year in, year out. And last year we added quite a few new people into that millionaire club. There's a new report from Vanguard. It's a good news, bad news situation. The great news, the headline to me is Americans are saving more than ever for retirement. And that is very promising news for me as a financial planner. I love to see that. The average American is saving 7.7% of their paycheck towards retirement. That's much better than what it used to be, almost twice what it used to be, not too long ago. Why is this the case? Why are more Americans saving towards retirement? Now, you might think that that's because people are more worried about the future or they are more informed or educated. And I think the latter, it might be part of the picture, but I think a lot of it just comes down to human behavior and psychology. Here's what we've started to see a lot more common in workplace scenarios. When companies offer a 401k, especially larger employers, they're doing an automatic enrollment, which means when the employee starts, they are going to be automatically, by default, enrolled in the 401k at a certain percentage, maybe 3% or 5%. And if the employee wants to opt out, they can just notify their employer and they can get opted out of the 401k, but by default, they're in. And when you do it that way, many, many more people will actually participate in the 401k as opposed to doing it the other way around. As a new employee, if you say, hey, do you want to sign up for the 401k? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But if you say, hey, as part of your employment here, we've got you in the 401k, you're automatically enrolled. If you want out, just let us know, but otherwise you're in. A lot of people will just stick with the status quo. And then on top of that, what a lot of employees are doing now, and I really do actually like this, is they have a scheduled increase over the years to get up to a certain percentage. So maybe what they do is they say, you're going to be automatically enrolled at 3%, and each year we will bump up your contribution by 1% until you get to 7% or 8% or whatever they list. And again, it's always up to the employee. The employee can change that. They can opt out if they want. They're not required to do that. But human behavior and human psychology is such that we just kind of tend to go with the flow and not really even think about it. And when companies implement that, what they see is a huge jump not only in participation, but in how much money people are putting into their 401ks. And this is leading to higher and higher savings. Now you say, Nate, is that enough? Is this a good percentage? Well, ideally, you should be saving between 10 to 20% of your income for retirement. Now, 7.7% is a great start. I believe that's not including employee or employer match in that figure. So you can think that there's going to be even an additional amount on top of that. But it's showing that there's a trend in the right direction, and using some of these righteous tricks, as we can call them, is a net benefit to a lot of employees. The bad news of this article and this research from Vanguard is that even though retirement savings are at an all-time high, so are 401k withdrawals. And as a financial planner, it always is a little bit of a gut punch when I see people taking money out of their 401k or out of their retirement savings before retirement. And this is interesting. I'm looking at the chart here from Vanguard. In 2024, it jumped from 3.6% of participants taking a hardship withdrawal to 4.8%. And in 2020, it was only 1.7%. So it's been a huge jump. So, and I think it's right in line with what we're seeing. So what's happening is more and more people are enrolled in their 401k and putting money in their 401k because they've been defaulted into it. But then what people are doing is they're kind of viewing that like an extra savings account. And then when they're behind on their credit card bills, or they have a medical bill, or a car breaks down, or they're just going into their 401k and taking money out of that to cover those needs. And so that's why it's a little bit of good news, bad news, because whenever you're dipping into your 401k, you're borrowing against your future self. You're taking money that would have grown into much, much more money over the long run. Plus, you're going to have to pay taxes on it. Plus, you're likely going to have to pay a 10% IRS early withdrawal penalty. So it's just not ideal. I understand there are emergency situations. I'm not saying that everybody who's taken a hardship withdrawal has done a terrible, terrible thing and they're horrible with money. But I would say most of the time, hardship withdrawals could have been avoided, and it really should be a last resort. So I'm encouraged to see more people saving for retirement. I would like to see less people taking money out early from their 401ks. Next article, this is I love these little litmus test type of things. There's something called the Pentagon Pizza Order Theory, or the Pentagon Pizza Tracker. There's literally an account on X, on Twitter, that tracks this in real time. So this goes back to the 1990s. There was this theory that increased pizza orders right around the immediate area of the Pentagon signaled international crises or crises internally within the United States, because of course people at the Pentagon are going to be staying late, working on something really, really important. So hey, we're ordering pizza. And it's actually turned out to be a pretty good indicator of the reality of the situation. So as this account posted here just a few days ago with the Israel and Iran conflict, sure enough, right when everything broke out, huge spike in pizza orders around the Pentagon. So I guess really you don't need to be watching CNN or Fox News. Just watch the Pentagon Pizza Report, and if there's a spike in pizza activity, you know something's going down. But it kind of goes hand in hand with things like the Waffle House Index. You know, Waffle House famously does not close except for the most extreme events. So if Waffle Houses are closing, that's a good indication of how severe an event, weather event or otherwise, was. So anyway, I just find that just so so intriguing. All right, next article, switching back to the financial planning side of things. I've seen a lot of articles that give you good questions, interview type questions to ask a financial advisor, to ask a financial planner when you're considering working with one. Maybe this is recency bias on my part, but I think this is my favorite list of questions I've seen so far, because they're just out of the ordinary and they really get down to, I think, the key questions, the key considerations, and you're not going to get canned, rehearsed answers from people when you ask these types of questions. So here they are real quick. Six questions to make an advisor squirm. I also like that title. Question number 1, can you describe your investment philosophy in 5 words or less? Something that I constantly struggle with and try to do a better job with is communicating clearly around financial jargon and lingo. When you work in an industry and you know the inside terminology, sometimes you start speaking it without even realizing it. Can you simplify, or can you condense your investment philosophy into just 5 words or less? I think that's a great question. Question 2 is, generally speaking, how many years would you want to see a fund manager outperform his or her benchmark to be confident that they are skilled as opposed to lucky? Hint, if the person says anything less than 15 years, that is a big red flag. Because in the short term, a 5-year, 7-year performance, that's nice, if a portfolio manager has beat their index or beat the market, but that actually doesn't tell you if they're skilled. You have to be able to do that over a very long period of time. Question number 3, what happens if you sell the firm, if you retire, or if you die unexpectedly? It's good for every financial advisor, every financial planner to have some type of succession plan, a backup plan in place, and you want to know what that is ahead of time. Question number 4, this is an interesting one. Why aren't your fees higher? Every financial planner knows that people at some point will ask them about their fees and why they set their fees the way they do, and they usually have a very good, I want to say rehearsed, but yeah, maybe rehearsed answer like, okay, here's what I would say. But asking it in this way really prompts the advisor to have to think a little bit deeper and not give a canned response, but really actually have to talk through, well, here's what we provide, here's where we think the value is, here's why we've priced our services appropriately. But more importantly, it'll get to the things that maybe they're limited in, the things that maybe they can't do, and therefore why they have their fees at that certain level. Question number 5, do you have any conflicts of interest with clients? The correct answer to this question is yes. And if somebody says no, they are not being honest, because every financial advisor, every financial planner has some conflict of interest. Now, I think we should try to minimize them as much as possible. And I always explain to clients, hey, I try to minimize my conflicts of interest, but there's no way to completely do it, because just the fact that I want you to work with me is a conflict of interest, right? In that I would want you to invest your money with me, or to pay me a monthly fee or a quarterly fee or an hourly fee, or however that goes. So you need to understand what the conflicts of interest are, and the advisor needs to be honest about it, and they need to talk about how they manage that and how they communicate it and are transparent about it. And then question number 6, what's the weakest part of your firm's capabilities? Not what's your strong suit, not what you do best, what can't you do? And again, every advisor has their limitations, and you want to see what they are. And most importantly, I think you want to see an advisor that's willing to be honest and humble about what they can and can't do for their clients. So I love those questions. And then last one, the history nerd in me had to throw this in here. One of my favorite history factoids for a long, long time has been that John Tyler, the 10th president, who was born in 1790, had a living grandson. Yes, living grandson up until May of 2025, when Harrison Tyler, I think he was also a Tyler, passed away at the age of 96. So you can do the math, but John Tyler had a child very late in life, and that son also had another child very late in life, such that literally a guy who was president in the 1840s, his grandson just died. Crazy. So rest in peace to one of my favorite history factoids. So I'm just throwing that in there for this month. Lastly, I hope you go back and check out a recent podcast, or you can check it out on the YouTube channel. How much should you have in cash? Very important question. I talked through just some practical considerations and got some good engagement and interest in that video. So if you haven't gotten a chance, you can go back and check that out. Well, thanks as always for listening and for watching. I'll see you on our next episode.